Good evening. Welcome everyone to tonight's courageous conversation with Andrea Miller, the founder of the Center for Common Ground. Thank you for joining us, and a great thanks to tonight's co-sponsors, Jewish Currents Magazine, the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, and Congregation Kol Ami of White Plains, New York. I'm Ann Toback, the CEO of the Workers' Circle, a social justice organization that builds progressive Jewish identity through Jewish cultural engagement, Yiddish language learning, multi-generational education, and social justice activism. For 120 years, the Workers' Circle community has been fighting for immigrant and worker rights, economic justice, and against bigotry and discrimination in the United States. As part of our social justice mission, we are committed to joining with partners like the Center for Common Ground and doing the hard work to end systemic racism in the United States. We recognize that wide-scale voter suppression plays a key role in continuing centuries of racism. Today, the Workers' Circle community is working to help ensure that as many people as possible have the ability to exercise their right to vote in the 2020 elections. One way we're doing this is by launching our Oy Vote campaign. Some people are looking at the world and saying Oy vey. We're saying Oy Vote. And Oy Vote is a pledge to vote along with voter resources that we're linking to right now in our chat. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Andrea Miller, our special guest for tonight's courageous conversation. Andrea is the founder of the Center for Common Ground, the executive director of People Demanding Action, the founding president of National Women's Political Caucus of Virginia, the founding tri-chair of the Virginia Poor People's Campaign, and a member of the Democracy and Governance Working Group of the Virginia Green New Deal. Andrea is an IT and political director, as well as a digital and elections strategist. She designs and administers digital phone banks and texting programs. From 2013 to 2015, she led the Progressive Roundtable on Capitol Hill, bringing together members of Congress, activists, and nonprofit leaders. Her expertise is in voting rights, climate change, and the Equal Rights Amendment. She has successfully advocated for legislation on both the federal and state level. And in 2008, she was the Democratic nominee for the Virginia 4th Congressional District. Andrea, welcome. There is so much to ask you, but why don't we start? I want to start out by saying, when do you sleep? But I really want to know how did you get your start in political activism today?
Well, number one, Anne, thank you so much. Workers' Circle, thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here. I am delighted. I am honored. I got my start in politics as a very young child. I had two uncles, count them two, who were aldermen in the Daily Machine, and my father was the baby brother. So every election night, I was in a counting room somewhere with one of my uncles.
Wow, it's funny how many people remember.
I learned how to turn out the vote, where they would, tell my dad, Miss Jessie hasn't voted yet. You need to go get Miss Jessie or Mr. whatever. It was, they knew their voters. They knew the impediments people had to voting, and they removed those impediments. And so when I realized we weren't doing that, I thought somebody needs to do that. And that's what brought me back.
Wow. I was just about to tell you before, so many of us remember voting with their fathers or mothers. You have quite a beginning. I mean, you have an inspirational beginning.
On the counting room floor.
Wow. A foreshadow of things to come. So tell us about what led you to found the Center for Common Ground, and tell us a little more about them.
Oh, well, we The NAACP, and I partner with various state NAACPs, hired me in 2016 to be the civic engagement coordinator for Virginia. And Virginia won. We had a very successful election. They hired 21 state coordinators, and I was the only one that won. And so in 2017, Virginia has all of her state races. Virginia has an election every year. So I realized I still had access to the voter file. So I said, well, can I use it? And they were like, well, we're not going to give you any money. But that wasn't the question. I said, can I use the tool? And they were like, oh, yeah, fine. Knock yourself out. Now, 2017, Virginia was 16 seats down in her House. By the end of, well, a little bit beyond election night, we were 10 votes away from tying for control. And that 10 votes whittled down to 1 vote. And they decided the election by picking a name out of a fishbowl.
Wow. Every vote counts, right?
Exactly. And in Virginia, we tell people we lost control of the Virginia House by 1 vote. Would you have been that 1 vote? And people are like, what?
Wow.
Every vote matters. Yes.
So when did you actually found the Center for Common Ground?
We founded Center for Common Ground in 2018 because we did the Virginia state races, and then we did the Alabama special election for Doug Jones. And we realized we really like doing elections and we're really good at it. So I, by then, had I had a leadership team all in California, and we had never met. We did not meet until September of 2018. But meanwhile, we had won a number of elections together. So we decided, yeah, we're going to do this. And voters of color, we thought after Alabama, everybody is going to do what we did. No, they didn't. So we realized we're going to need to keep doing it.
And so give me a little bit more background for people who are just connecting. And I'm going to put in a plug and say at the end of this program, we're going to give you some opportunities to partner with us and the Center for Common Ground and make some calls. But tell us a little more about what you're doing today.
Well, Center for Common Ground, and it's this year, we have sent 6.4 million postcards to voters. Wow. Voter registration postcards, pledge to vote, and then early voting postcards, letting voters know where and how they can find their voting center or where they're going to early vote. We have so far made 881,000 phone calls. I know we are going to pass the 1 million mark. We made more than 78,000 phone calls last week. So we are going to pass the 1 million mark. We are going to send 3.3 million text messages to voters in our 8 target states, which are Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas. So those are our 8 states. You are going to love this number, Ann. When we analyzed the calls we made to Georgia for the Georgia primary, we made 79,000 good calls, meaning we talked to the voter or we left the voter a message. 79,000. Out of 79,000 calls, 57,610 people voted. That's 73%.
Wow, that is astounding.
Here's the big number.
Yeah.
25,000 of those people had never voted before.
Oh my God, that is astounding. And just to put in one more plug, you're nonpartisan, correct?
Exactly. Yes, We support the voters. We have a very simple mission. Our mission is to empower underrepresented voters and to make it possible for them to vote.
It's a wonderful story. We're living in a world where we're getting a lot of bad news. You are just good news for us all, because really voting is one of the pillars of our democracy. And the more we vote, the stronger our democracy is, right?
Yes, yes. We tell people, we don't care who you vote for. We just want you to be able to walk in that door and cast your ballot.
Yeah.
And people like that. We're not selling them a candidate.
Yeah. No, I think it's almost, I almost have no words, which is unusual for me. I want to take us back a little bit to give people a background in why we're dealing with so much voter suppression in the United States right now. And that's going back. We had the passage of the Voter Rights Act in 1965. And at that time, and of course that was the center of the civil rights movement, there was a lot of work to enable Black Americans to register and vote. And then the Voter Rights Act was expanded to include further ballot protections. And then something happened, we know, and that sort of reversed all that work since 1965. Can you share why we're here in 2020 with potentially millions of votes to be, facing suppression?
Well, one of the tenets of the Voting Rights Act was that states that had a history of voter suppression, think the South, and there were some areas in northern states that were impacted. They had to get any changes they wanted to make to the way they did elections pre-cleared through the Justice Department. And then the Justice Department would examine that and say, you're just trying to make it harder for certain people to vote. Get out of here with that. No, you're not doing that. Well, we lost the formula to calculate whether or not, can you believe this? A state had been discriminating against voters. And when that fell apart, suddenly nobody was under pre-clearance. And that is when you started to see states pass all these restrictive voting laws. Well, in order to vote, you must have a photo ID. All right, that doesn't sound that bad until you think that in the South, if you were born prior to 1966, you were not born in a hospital because Black people couldn't be born in a hospital. You were born at home. So that meant you didn't automatically get that background paperwork of a birth certificate got added. So for some people, maybe yes, they did that. For others, no. You were walking around, you were obviously born. Nobody knew. The stork didn't just drop you out of the sky. We figured that out. So what happened for a lot of rural people who never left the rural areas, they didn't have the background documentation to get a photo ID. If they were really, really rural, they may not have had any idea how to go about getting one because it involved writing to the state, ordering the thing online. Frequently, they would come back and they would say, well, who can attest that you were born on that day? Well, if you're 80 years old, do you know somebody who's like older than you who can say, oh yeah, they were born on that day? So a lot of people just didn't know what to do and they couldn't get a photo ID. So that was very problematic. And then let's not forget felony disenfranchisement, something that took 8.5 million people off the voting rolls.
Wow. And Is the big change you're talking about resulting from the Supreme Court decision, Shelby Counter versus Holder?
Yes, that really and truly is a lot of it, because that lets states come up with all kinds of interesting rules about how they wanted to conduct elections. The other big thing we see now with computers is the systematic and annual purging of the voting rolls, where, oh, we're not purging voters, we're just doing file maintenance. And their file maintenance says in many states, if you haven't voted in the last 2 federal elections, that's 4 years. Well, you must no longer be a voter here, so we're going to dump you off the voter rolls. So because you didn't use your ability to vote, we are going to remove your ability to vote. And they're supposed to notify people. I think we've all heard about the notorious postcards that they send voters. The problem is the postcards look like junk mail, so either the voters ignore them or they misread the postcard. Oh, it's from the Board of Elections. Yeah, that's my name. That's my address. Yeah, I'm registered. Okay, I'm good. And they throw it away.
Right.
They miss the tiny part that says, if you do not call us or return this postcard, you will be removed from the voting rolls.
And there have been a lot of mistakes on in those purges where people were purged who had in fact voted, and I think those mistakes could have covered even hundreds of thousands of people. Can you name some of the states that are particularly egregious in their purging?
Well, Texas is one. In Texas, you need to renew your voter registration more frequently than you renew your driver's license. Mm-hmm. So Texas is one. In North Carolina, they say that they're really not purging voters, but again, they are looking at, if you miss 2 federal elections, you end up on the inactive list. You normally can only be on the inactive list about 1 election, in some states maybe 2. And so we tell people, if you look at your status and it's inactive, please understand you are on the pre-purge list. At some point, if you don't go vote or take an action with your state board of elections, you're going to get removed.
You know, I want to just put in a plug to people even on the East Coast, because of course we're talking about a lot of southern states purging. But in the last year, I've experienced a lot of misrepresentation, even in New York, as far as where your voter area is. I received, just in the primary, I received multiple directions to different locations to cast my ballot, and I encountered a lot of people with a lot of confusion. So I really encourage everyone, no matter what state you are, to go to your state's voter registration site, look up your name, you'll be there, confirm that they have your name on the site, and look where you're supposed to vote, early ballot and on election day, which are usually 2 different things. And don't assume that where you've been voting, because I experienced I was in the same location for over 10 years, and my voter site changed, and they kept sending me postcards for the previous site, even though it was no longer there. But I was ready for it. So don't assume you know where to vote, you know, and make sure wherever you are that you're on the voter records. Don't assume that you're actually good to vote unless you see it. And what I encourage everyone to do is print out your name on the records and yes, have it in your hand when you go to vote. No matter if you're in New York or Georgia or Texas, have the record in your hand, because you just don't know nowadays.
Right. Well, I often suggest, when you pull up your voter registration record and it says active, I like people to pull out their phone and take a picture with your phone, because it will be date and time stamped. They cannot remove anyone from the rolls after August 6th unless they believe they are dead or they have been notified this person has committed a felony, and you live in a state where a felony conviction removes your eligibility to vote. So if you were active when you took the picture, but when you show up to vote, suddenly you are deregistered, they have a poll book problem. Someone has hacked their poll book. And when we talk about interference with the election on the computers, one of the really vulnerable areas is the electronic poll book. So some states have told their county registrars, make a paper backup of your poll book, so that if on some election day, when you go to that poll book, it's just dead or frozen, you can go to paper and you will know everybody's voter status.
Okay. And just also to ask you, because another problem with voting is polling sites changing. There's been notices that, especially on university campuses, there's been changes in polling sites, and this impacts college students significantly. Is there any information you can give us about that?
Well, it's when you look at the way the system is operating today, you will see patterns of there are certain people that they don't seem to want to vote. That would be community of color voters. That would be young voters. And if you're on a college campus, meaning you are, quote, in that enlightened stage, they really don't want you to vote. So yes, we have seen an increased problem with that. For instance, in Texas, you can use a gun license as your ID when you go to vote, but you can't use your student ID.
Wow. Yeah, I love the gun license piece. It's mind-boggling, right?
Right.
And terrifying, exactly, all at once. Let's talk more about Center for Common Ground, which is so critical and so inspiring. You've focused the work of this, or the Center for Common Ground focuses its nonpartisan work on Black voters.
Community of color voters.
Okay, community.
So Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native Americans.
So why don't you tell us, I mean, I think we get it, we have an inkling, but tell us how you've come to focus on these communities and why it's so critical, why your work is so critical to making sure that the vote that's upcoming is truly open to all.
Well, number one, it kind of goes back to when I was a little child sitting under those tables and watching my uncles look at their list of voters and singling out voters that were very vulnerable, that could have problems voting, and saying, we want to make sure that these voters are able to come and vote. When I look at the voters that are being removed from the rolls, we started in November of 2019 calling voters of color who had been deregistered. And that means they were formally registered. And now when we looked at the voter file, they were unregistered. You're not in the voter file unless at some point you were registered. So we started reaching out to those voters to let them know you're going to need to re-register if you want to vote in the 2020 election. Because remember, in the early primaries, we're going to be in February, and then a lot of southern states had their primaries in March. So we started our outreach in 2019.
Wow.
So we know that there are certain voters where while the numbers are less than the overall number of voters who are disenfranchised, the percentage to the population is significantly higher.
Mm-hmm. And how long is the work, are the phone calls going to be happening, and who are you calling right now?
Well, the phone calls are going to go on until Election Day at 5 o'clock.
Okay.
And right now, our focus is on South Carolina and Alabama. South Carolina is voting now. They started voting on October 5th. And Alabama, they were the first state in the nation. They started voting on September 9th. Why are we calling them? Why are they a focus? Because never in their history has everybody in the state been able to go and vote early. So that is why they are a focus. We want them to get the good news now, rather than all waiting and forming a 10-hour line on Election Day. Go now. You can
great.
go now. Everybody can go now. People are like, really? Yes, you can go now.
And that's part of what, at the end, when we talk about how we can help out, we can connect with the center and help people know that they can vote now and enable them to take whatever steps they need, right?
Yes, exactly. And we've got a texting program that is doing the same thing. And when we text the voters, one of the things we can do via text message is we can look at the voter's county, look at the voter's zip code, and if they tell us their voting plan says they're going to early vote, then we can automatically send them their closest early voting location. Your closest early voting location is this, it's at this address, it's open on these dates at this time.
That's amazing. And I know so many people in our community at the Worker Circle and in our partners communities are looking for ways that we can help. We're all kind of isolated right now, and it's amazing. You're giving us a great opportunity to really help civic engagement.
Right, from home.
From home. I mean, how much easier could, I personally once flew to Florida to help make sure that the vote in Florida was fairly achieved. And so the idea of doing it from home, while kind of frustrating because many of us would like to be outside more, at least this is an amazing opportunity.
Right, and it really isn't that safe to go out and get on a plane, go to a strange place. So we felt very, very special that we had mastered the art of remotely working with voters, that we didn't have to figure it all out. It's like, well, this is how we've worked for years. And gee, we're very, very good at it. And so we were able to bring our techniques to people who really wanted to help, but now weren't physically going to be able to go anywhere. We actually had a team associated with Center for Common Ground called Commit to Canvas, where they would normally fly into a state, stay 2 weeks, and knock on doors.
Yeah, no, you were ahead of your time, and we're all really grateful you were, because we really appreciate your work. I want to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over. We have some special guests who are looking to ask you some questions. But my final question for this section is, we're getting up to Election Day. I know you and the Center for Common Ground has really connected with hundreds of thousands of voters. What's next? What can we do to help change this voter landscape so that voter suppression is no longer so prevalent in our country?
Well, we are going to have to do something hard, and we're going to have to do something big. Voting in the United States has always been and still is a privilege. When you look at the original United States Constitution and who was awarded the right to vote, the franchise was only given to white male property owners. So if you were white and male, but you didn't own property, sorry, you're not voting. If you were not white, I really don't think that's going to happen. And women didn't get the franchise until 1920. So our pivot after the election will be a constitutional amendment making voting a right. And the amendment, the words of the amendment are going to be something like every United States citizen of voting age shall have the fundamental right to vote in any public election in the jurisdiction in which that citizen resides. Boom, mic drop.
Chills. One other piece, I know the John Lewis Voter Rights Act is also out there. Will this work with that?
Yes, yes. Whenever you do a constitutional amendment, you're going to need a reasonably long list of enabling legislation that closes all those little loopholes that the state has managed to find. So John Lewis, when he had his Voter Empowerment Act, he said there is not going to be any photo ID. So we've got to get rid of that. There's another interesting thing that happens in many, many southern states. You have all these rural prisons, and the people that are in the rural prisons are mainly urban Black and brown people. Kind of amazing how that happened.
Yeah.
Now, they do not have the ability to vote from prison. However, the people that are in that community claim those prisoners on their census. So they get money for the people that are imprisoned in their jurisdiction. So if you're driving through rural Virginia, you might come to a little town where it's not really looking like much, but there'll be a big sign, the prison is that way. And all of a sudden you'll see new administration building, new courthouse, new library. That was all built on the backs of the people that are currently incarcerated in those prisons. We've got to change that. And then we wonder why urban communities don't have money. Well, so many of the people in the urban communities that have been imprisoned, the money that should have gone to that community is going to a rural community somewhere.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of work to do. And I want to tell you one hallmark of the Worker Circle is we want to be in it for the marathon. So yes. This isn't a great example of where we have some short-term goals, getting voters to the polls unimpeded now, right. But after the election, we're right there. We know there's some long-term work to be done. Right. And I think it's critical that we know this isn't going to happen overnight. You can't reverse systemic racism overnight, unfortunately. It's going to take a marathon, and we all need to make the commitment to be in this marathon with you.
And it is our goal, one and done by 2024. So through the U.S. House, through the U.S. Senate, signed by the new president, and then pivot, ratified by 38 states.
Okay, well, we all have some work to do, but let's now. I'm going to turn some new questioners out. I'm going to call up Louise Pasick, and while we're going through a couple of our special guest questioners, I want to say to everyone watching, if you have questions for Andrea, please put them in the chat. I think we're going to have some time to entertain some of your questions too, and stick with us. We're going to keep looking at this issue and how we're going to change the world by letting people vote. So Louise Pasick, a Worker Circle member, please, I welcome you to the floor.
Thank you, Anne. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for introducing us to Andrea and all the magnificent work that she has been doing since she was a little kid. Yes, I'm a longtime old Worker Circle member. My question is, Well, and I've also signed up to make calls to Black voters with the Center for Common Ground. My question is, can we still make a difference this close to the election? And the second question, and what about people who want to vote by mail? Can they still do that?
All right, those are two great questions. In 2017, when I asked to get access to the Alabama voter file, we only had 10 days until that special election. In 8.5 days, we called 43,000 voters in the Alabama Black Belt. And if anybody remembers watching those returns come in, the Black Belt counties were the last counties coming in. And that was where we were. When we originally started calling those counties, we had a question in our script, and we asked the voters, has anybody contacted you about the special election? And 100% of the people we talked to in the first 2 days said no. So we finally removed the question. We were doing outreach to voters that nobody really cared about anymore. They were rural, they were Black, they were poor, they weren't ever going to be donors, and they weren't consistent voters. But they were citizens just kind of waiting to be asked, come back and participate in democracy. And they did. So it is never too late, which is why we call up until 5 o'clock on election day. It really does make a difference. It might be a worker who has worked all day and they've come home and they're feeling kind of tired, and then they get that phone call and they think, well, I kind of thought about voting. I kind of thought nobody would notice if I didn't vote, but gee, somebody did notice me. So, okay, I'm going to put my coat out and I'm going to take my kid with me and we're going to go down to the polling location. So, yeah, that's really what happens. Please repeat your second question because I get so excited about that one. My brain just goes.
Thank you very much.
Oh, Louise, did you have any other questions or was that it?
I think that's it.
Okay.
Vote by mail. Vote by mail.
Vote by mail, right.
All right. Vote by mail is really difficult. So we do not recommend vote by mail for communities historically who have never done it. What we are seeing in North Carolina and many other states is that ballots by community of color voters are being rejected 4 to 5 times more than non-community of color voters. So we are telling voters, go vote in person, early in person vote. You've got a lot of experience with that and you know how to do that. There aren't all those inherent traps. In North Carolina, to vote by mail, you need a witness. Well, if people forget to have a witness and they don't have that witness signature, then their vote isn't going to count. If they forget to sign the ballot, if they don't put it in the security envelope, there's all these traps and pitfalls. So we say, go do what you know, go early vote, show up in person, get checked in, and then you go vote. I'm calling it bank your vote. So vote in a way that you know is going to be counted. Or we're also telling people, if you've got one of those vote by mail ballots, and we ran into a lot of people in Georgia who had their vote by mail ballot and they hadn't mailed it, we're like, take it down to the early vote center and turn it in. Or Georgia had drop boxes, put it in a drop box. Don't be sitting there with that ballot on election day, because the rules for what you can do with a ballot on election day is very different than what you can do on all the days that are not election days. So I like simple, straightforward. Look, you've been voting in person for decades. Let's keep doing it.
And wear a mask if you're going to go down to the polling place.
Yes, yes. As a matter of fact, because the voters in Mississippi have no early voting and they were not allowed to use COVID-19 as an excuse, I had to buy 25,000 PPEs for our volunteers who are going to be standing at the polls in many rural locations where the voters are poor. And we will be giving them a little packet with a mask and hand sanitizer and wipes, because they vote on machines and they may not clean the machines properly. So it's like, if we're asking people to go out, aren't we responsible for trying to help keep them safe?
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Important information. Thank you, Louise. I'm going to move on to our next special guest, Joey Pat. Joey is a senior at New York University and also a member of our Workers' Circle College Network, who have already started phone banking with the Center for Common Ground. So Joey, you should unmute yourself. There you are. And please ask your question.
Hi. So you've mentioned that students are among those that are impacted by voter suppression. Can you say a little bit more about how this happens? And then also, are Black students doubly impacted by this?
Well, when you're a student, if you're in a state that allows you to use a gun license but not a student ID, that now means you have to go and spend your money and buy another ID that they're willing to accept, probably a state ID. So for a lot of students that are kind of just eking by, this really creates a hardship. When you're on a very large campus and your campus is not a polling location and there is no bus transportation from your campus to where the polling location is, that is also another form of disenfranchisement. You want to vote, but how are you supposed to get there? And then the other thing that really is making voting difficult this year is students had to decide really early on, if they were not going to be on campus, where were they going to say they resided for the purposes of voter registration. So there was just so much to think about and try to deal with. And why should voting be so hard? Why? There's no reason for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Joey. And I just want to do a shout out to our college network. You guys really inspire us all. You're our future, and our future is really looking good. It's wonderful to have you as part of our Workers' Circle community. And now, just speaking back to the college network, I'm going to introduce Jonathan Taubes, who is our social justice associate, and part of his oversight is he helps organize the college network, which is a wonderful for us all. So Jonathan, welcome, and I know you have a question too.
Yes, thanks, Anne. Thanks so much, and thank you, Andrea, for the work you're doing with the Center for Common Ground. I already took part in one phone bank, and I'm looking forward to doing more. Wow, it is really an honor to partner with you guys on such a critical campaign.
Thank you. We're honored too.
Great. So, one thing that's on my mind is how, of course, fighting voter suppression in the here and now defending communities of color who are targeted by it is so important. Some of the things you're sharing, honestly, I'm finding harrowing, and I'm someone who's very clued in, and very, involved, and yet so much of the stuff is not publicized enough. So it's so important. And in many ways, the work is a precondition of the work we have to do post-election too. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that a bit. The work after the election, not only in terms of legislation, but in terms of building movements that seek to end these systemic inequalities that got us here in the first place. So, oh my God, I see you're so excited. I'm wondering what you see on the horizon and, the potential post-election battles that you're most motivated about, and just, ways that we as individuals and our organizations can strengthen American democracy in the long term.
Oh, Jonathan, that is a fabulous question. So what we are looking at in the post-election phase will be the community, the additional empowerment of communities who felt they had no voice, their vote didn't matter, and there was nothing they can do. Because my belief is after this election, we will go back. We have a lot of on the ground in community partners who are really, really working on this. And we've created tools. Our taxing tool, Tax% is ours. My board member wrote it. He wrote it for me. And we purchased cell phone lists. All of those tools are going to get left in communities because communities are going to want to get together and talk about what it is that they want and what it is that they need. And we're going to help them guide those discussions. And then they will have the knowledge of utilizing the tools that they use to elect people to now use those tools for their own community empowerment, for their own advocacy. If there is something that they want, we will invite all of our communities to join us one night a month. I call it For America's Civics Lesson, where we're going to make sure communities understand at what level, whatever you need to change, where is it really? Is it at the federal level? Is it at the state level? Or is it at your city council level? Maybe you need to be working with your city council or your county board to make these changes. And once you identify this is what our community wants and this is what we need, now you can begin advocating for it and holding the people that got elected accountable to what you want. And if they don't seem to be responding, you have already demonstrated to yourselves that you have the power to, quote, put another butt in the seat. So maybe you need to run for that seat. So they will have built community, they will have built power, and they will have their own organization that can work to help them get elected. One of the things that happens normally after elections is organizations come in, they bring tools. When the election is over, they pack up all the tools and they leave. And that's one of the reasons why people in communities say elections don't do a darn thing. It doesn't matter who we elect. We still end up sitting here by ourselves with nothing. That is going to change. They're going to have an opportunity to meet their support network, groups like the Workers' Circle, friends that they haven't met who care about their success and who will listen to what they are accomplishing. And we're only going to be asking for one night a month from the people that are our supporters and the people that are our communities, where they come together and then these communities build.
Wow.
We call them democracy centers.
Thank you so much. And it's an honor to be in the struggle with you.
Yes, and I love that. It is a struggle, but it is the struggle that we can win.
It truly is a privilege to be working with you and the center, and you make me excited for the future, and that's so special. We have a question from one of our audience members. Nancy is asking, how are you working with communities of faith?
Oh, well, we are currently partnered with the Religious Action Center on Reform Judaism. Rabbi Michael Namath has been the moderator of one of our Voting in Troubled Times webinars. He personally has probably sent out more than 300,000 postcards to various RAC members across the country. He has introduced us to synagogues all over throughout our target states. We are also partnered with the Unitarian Universalists through their UU the Vote campaign. They did a special phone bank for us back in July, where when they were at their General Synod, they made 114,000 phone calls in 3 days to voters in Texas before the Texas primary. We are also partnered with the Faith and Democracy Initiative of United Church of Christ. And so I've spoken at a number of their regional conferences, and I will send it to you, Anne and Noel, some wonderful pictures of our mobile billboard, the notorious RBG. And on the back of it, it has a listing of our national partners and their logos. And you are all on the back of the notorious RBG.
That is amazing. That is just, that's the place I would want our logo to be. It's exciting.
And I am so thankful for my board members who just have the most amazing imagination. Tonight, the RVG is in Stone Mountain, Georgia. So if you know what Stone Mountain is, get your mind around a pink and purple 26-foot Winnebago sitting there at Stone Mountain, all over its side saying vote equality, and on the back of it, a dark brown hand and a light brown hand holding ballots over a ballot box saying vote your power.
Wow. I'm guessing we can see photos on the website, right, of the Center for Common Ground? No?
We don't have a photo album. We don't have anything. Nope. We're a very quiet, secret little organization.
Grassroots, yeah.
People don't really know we're there.
Well, we know. A few people know. A few million, I think. So I wanted to bring on board Noel D'Amico, who is the Social Justice Director of the Workers' Circle, and who made our initial contact with you and the Center for Common Ground. And I'm going to let her ask the last question and close it out with you. Noel, you did quite the shidduch, as we would say, and it's a wonderful, I know this is only the beginning of a lot of work and a lot of celebrations, but again, hard work in front of us, and we're ready for it because that's the only way you bring about real world change.
That is absolutely right, Anne. And Andrea, we cannot thank you enough. All of us tonight have heard how we can combat voter suppression, not just in the future, but right now, prior to the 2020 election, by equipping voters of color with the information that they need to make it to the polls and to get that ballot done. So I want to invite all of you who maybe have never thought about phone banking in this way before to join with us at the Worker Circle as we phone bank together with the Center for Common Ground. And in a moment, you're going to see a picture here of our college students who have already been heating up the phone lines as they've been making calls with the Center for Common Ground. It's very easy to do, and we've just dropped a link into the chat line. And so I encourage you to learn more. Go to that link. You're going to get that link in a follow-up email because you've been with us tonight. On behalf of the Workers' Circle, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, Jewish Currents, the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, and also Congregation Kol Ami of White Plains. And I'd also like to thank all of you who have joined with us tonight. You've chosen to come here amidst many different obligations. You've come here tonight at this most urgent hour for our democracy. And I trust that you are leaving inspired and determined to work to ensure every single person's right to vote, that our nation may be more truly of, by, and for the people. And now, Andrea, with our utmost thanks, I'm going to turn to you and give you the last word.
Thank you, Noel. I was thinking as you were speaking that what we are forming, have formed, and are continuing to form is that coalition of conscience that Dr. King spoke about so many times, that it is the people of faith, that it is the people of all colors who choose to come together to stand on the right side of morality and to move things forward into a future where there is respect and equality for all of us. So thank you all so much for everything that you have done so far and for everything that you will do. We don't often have an opportunity to say, I was part of something that was bigger than myself. And we will all remember, probably for the rest of our lives, where we were on November 3rd, 2020. And I believe that on November 3rd, 2020, there will be a resounding yay that comes up from all over the world at what a very small, dedicated group of people did to change the world. So thank you.
Andrea, thank you. Thank you to all, and good night.